Some roads are cursed, and those who travel them may never be the same. This is the story of a trucker who took a back road through Mississippi one fateful night, and the horrors that followed him. Danny Carter was a long-haul trucker hauling freight through the Deep South in the late 60s. He preferred the back roads, less traffic, no way stations, and a straight shot to his next stop. He'd driven those roads so many times he could do it blindfolded. But one night, that familiarity shattered. The moon hung in the sky like a dying ember, barely casting enough light to touch the cracked asphalt ahead. Towering trees lined the road, their twisted branches clawing at the heavens. The only sound was the steady growl of his engine, until the radio crackled with static, and then fell silent. Then he saw them, figures on the roadside, several white men standing in a tight huddle. Something about their stillness, the way they stood like statues in the dark, it made his stomach clench. Then they moved, in unison, and they threw something into the road. No, not something, someone. A limp, dark-skinned body hit the pavement like a discarded rag doll. Danny's heart seized. He slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. A sickening thud, then the jolt of the wheels rolling over flesh and bone. Once, twice, 3 times. His breath caught in his throat as his headlights swept over the men again. They hadn't moved. They were just standing there, watching him, rifles in hand. Every nerve in Danny's body screamed for him to stop, to help, to do something. But survival took over. He kept driving. The road blurred through his windshield, his knuckles white against the wheel. In the side mirror, he caught one last glimpse of them, unmoving silhouettes melting into the darkness. He never spoke about what happened that night, never saw a newspaper article, never heard a whisper about a body found on that road. It was like it never happened. But the silence was worse than any accusation. Years passed. Danny left the South, moved to Massachusetts, tried to start over. But the past, some things, they don't let go. One summer evening at a family barbecue, his nephew's friend Alex struck up a conversation. "You ever see anything real bad on the road?" Danny smirked, taking a slow sip of beer. "Oh yeah, one time ran right over a man. Supposed to happen, I guess." Mike, his nephew, shifted uncomfortably, but Alex just stared. "What do you mean, supposed to happen?" Danny chuckled, something dark curling at the edges of his voice. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time, let's just say that. I laid on my horn and kept rolling. Wasn't gonna stop for him. Hell, the look on his face, eyes popped wide like he knew exactly what was coming. A chill crept down Alex's spine. The air around them, once thick with the smell of barbecue and summer heat, had curdled, turned stale, rancid. That night, Alex couldn't sleep. He kept picturing the man's face. The fear, the moment of realization, the sound of bones shattering under 18 wheels. But what haunted him most? The way Danny had smiled when he said it, and then Danny's past started clawing its way back. At first it was little things, his radio flipping to static, shadows slithering at the edge of his vision, cold spots in the house even when the summer heat pressed thick against the walls. Then the dreams started. He was back on that road, driving. And no matter what he did, no matter how hard he tried to swerve, he always hit the body. Always. Every single time, the same sickening crunch of bones, the weight under the tires, the body twisting, contorting until it was staring up at him. And then one night, he woke up to a sound outside, an air horn. His truck had been sold years ago. Danny's death was almost poetic. A storm rolled in that evening. Thunder grumbled low in the distance as rain pounded against the roof. His old TV antenna had been acting up, static, flickering images, warped voices. Frustrated, he climbed onto the roof to fix it. Rain slicked the shingles under his boots, but he'd done this 100 times before. Then he heard it, the unmistakable sound of tires rolling over flesh. His foot slipped. The ladder beneath him jerked sideways, toppling toward the power line. For a split second, he was weightless. Then, impact. Electricity tore through him. His body seized, his fingers curled into claws. His mouth stretched open in a soundless scream as his skin blackened and split, and through the blinding pain, the burning, the suffocating heat, he saw him, standing below, watching, the man he had left on the road all those years ago. When they found Danny, the power was still humming through his lifeless body, his mouth locked in a frozen eternal scream. Some say justice is blind, others say it never forgets. Some roads are cursed, and those who travel them may never be the same. Danny Carter learned that the hard way. The worst experience of my life happened in 1996, and even now, decades later, I can't shake the haunting memories. I was a long-haul trucker, team driving with a guy named Mark. That night, we had just picked up a heavy load in Detroit and scaled it out. The rain was relentless, hammering against the windshield like 1,000 tiny fists. I volunteered to take the first shift, gripping the wheel as we pushed through the storm, the highway stretching endlessly before me. Before Mark went to sleep, he smirked, eyes glinting in the dim cab light. Then he said something that still sends shivers down my spine. "If we die on this trip, I'll come back to haunt you." He chuckled, zipped up the sleeper curtain, and was out like a light. For 10 straight hours, I drove through sheets of rain, the wipers barely keeping up. The rhythmic sound of water pelting the truck, the distant flashes of headlights from passing cars, it all blurred together. My body ached, exhaustion clawing at me, but I pushed on. Finally, I pulled into a rest stop. Mark groggily climbed into the driver's seat, rubbing his eyes as I stumbled into the sleeper. My boots hit the floor with a dull thud. Wrapping myself in a blanket, I put on a VHS tape, Cousin Vinny, hoping the noise would lull me to sleep. But before I drifted off, a chilling thought crept into my mind. What if we go off a cliff? What should I do? The answer came instinctively: get low and pray. I barely had time to close my eyes before Mark's voice shattered the silence. "Shit! Hang on!" The truck jerked violently. My stomach dropped. I couldn't see anything. The curtain was still zipped tight, but I could feel it. We were losing control. Then Mark screamed, and this time his voice was raw with terror. "We're going down!" Everything inside me screamed, "Move!" But I couldn't think. I just reacted. Instinct kicked in, and I hit the floor, pressing myself against the hard surface, heart hammering like a jackhammer in my chest. Then, impact. A gut-wrenching jolt, metal twisting. The world spinning out of control, no slow motion effect, no time to brace, just chaos, a violent, deafening collision. Metal screeched against metal, the sheer force knocking the air from my lungs. Then, silence. A deafening, suffocating silence. My ears rang, my body ached. I was alive, but something was horribly wrong. We had flipped. The truck was facing the opposite direction. My right hand throbbed with pain, my lip was split open, the sharp taste of blood thick in my mouth. "Mark," my voice barely came out, hoarse and shaky. "I'm here," he groaned. "We gotta get out. I smell smoke." Adrenaline flooded my system. I clawed at the latch above, pushing open the roof hatch, now an escape door. Crawling out, I found myself standing on wet pavement, in my socks. Cold rain mixed with diesel fuel and oily puddles around my feet. Smoke curled from the crumpled hood, twisting into the night sky. People were running. Some carried fire extinguishers, sprinting toward what was left of a white pickup truck. My stomach twisted. I took a step forward, but then I saw her. A paramedic. She knelt beside the wreckage, whispering to someone inside. Her expression was pure heartbreak. I watched as she mouthed the words, "I know." Then it hit me. We weren't the only ones in the crash. Mark and I were ushered into an ambulance. As the doors shut, I caught one last glimpse of the wreckage. My vision blurred. Tears spilled down my cheeks. At the hospital, the truth slammed into me like a freight train. The 3 people in the pickup, a man, his wife, and their 4-year-old daughter, hadn't survived. I broke. Uncontrollable sobs racked my body. I couldn't stop picturing their final moments. The terror they must have felt, seeing an 80,000-pound semi barreling toward them. Their daughter's tiny hands clutching at her parents, their final, futile screams. Mark sat beside me, silent. We both knew there were no words. Weeks later, I was back on the road. I avoided that stretch of highway at all costs, but the nightmares followed me. Every night, I heard Mark's voice echoing in my head. "If we die on this trip, I'll come back to haunt you." One night, I stopped at a truck stop, exhausted. I climbed into the sleeper, turning on the TV for background noise. Rain tapped against the roof. Then, out of nowhere, my truck shook. My breath caught in my throat. I froze. Another jolt, stronger this time. The whole truck rocked. I sat up, heart pounding. Then, silence. I reached for the door handle, peering outside. Nothing. The parking lot was empty. Shaking my head, I climbed back into bed. But just as I pulled the blanket over me, I heard it. A whisper. Soft. Childlike. "Why did you leave us?" My blood ran cold. I bolted upright, my pulse thundering in my ears. Then, closer this time. Why didn't you help? I lunged for the curtain and yanked it open. Nothing. Just the dark, empty cab of my truck. But the guilt never left me. Every time I drove through rain, I heard their voices in the wind. Every time I passed an empty highway at night, I saw their faces in my mirrors. And sometimes, when I was alone, I swore I felt a small hand brush against my arm. That stretch of highway was later patched. They fixed the deep grooves that had caused so many wrecks, but for some of us, the damage could never be repaired. To this day, I still wake up in a cold sweat, reliving that night. And when the rain starts falling, I remember the voices, the ones that never should have been silenced. They say the road holds secrets, whispers of the past, shadows stretching beyond headlights, and travelers who vanish without a trace. I used to think it was just talk, stories meant to keep kids from wandering too far. But that winter night, I learned the truth. And it still haunts me. It was late December. I didn't own a car, so my younger sister Sarah drove from Atlanta to Houston to pick me up. In the back seat, her boxer puppy Otis bounced with excitement, his stubby tail wagging. Our plan was simple: drive to Kansas for Christmas, then I'd take the wheel on the way back to Atlanta. After that, our mom would cover my bus ticket home. The drive up was smooth, filled with nostalgic road trip music, gas station snacks, and stories from our childhood. But the way back, God, the way back was something else entirely. The day after Christmas, we packed up and hit the road. The sky was heavy, thick with clouds, the temperature plummeting fast. Otis whined in the back seat, restless. Sarah had brought tranquilizers, muttering, "She doesn't travel well." By the time we reached Eddyville, Kentucky, the roads were a sheet of ice. At a gas station, Otis leapt out to relieve herself, but immediately yelped, scrambling back into the car, her paws cut by the frozen ground. As I filled the tank, a sheriff approached. His face was grim. "Y'all might want to reconsider driving further," he said, adjusting his hat. "Got 3 hours worth of wrecks up ahead." We had two choices: find a motel or push through. Money was tight, and I figured the further south we got, the better the roads would be, so we kept going. We took an alternate route, a lonely, unlit stretch of highway known as the WK Parkway. The darkness was suffocating. No streetlights, just the occasional flicker of distant farmhouses. I gripped the wheel, sticking to the center of the road, praying we wouldn't skid. Then, movement. A glint. A flash of glass. Someone was standing in the middle of the road. A man. He was dressed in dark gray, his face hidden behind wild, matted hair. The only thing visible was the reflection in his thick-rimmed glasses. I slammed the brakes. The car fish-tailed wildly. The man dodged left, then right, mirroring my every move. It was like a sick, twisted dance. Finally, he darted to the side, disappearing into the blackness just as we skidded past. Sarah let out a shaky breath. "I know his pants aren't dry." We laughed, but not for long. Somehow we made it to Hopkinsville and back onto I-24. The highway was a nightmare. Traffic jammed for miles, accidents everywhere. A driver ahead of us lost patience. He veered across the median, trying to turn back. His tires lost grip. We watched as his car spun out, sliding straight into oncoming traffic. His headlights flickered once before disappearing over the hill. We never saw him again. Sarah gave Otis another tranquilizer. The dog whimpered, then went limp in my lap. Near Chattanooga, a strange mist rolled in, thick, unnatural. It was like someone had draped a white sheet 2 feet in front of us. I slowed down, my pulse hammering. The road was gone. Just nothing. A dense, white void. Minutes stretched into eternity. Then, without warning, the fog lifted. A semi-truck loomed 5 feet ahead. I yanked the wheel, barely missing it. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Sarah took over the driving, guiding us into Atlanta. Relief washed over me, until Otis let out a deep, guttural groan. Then warmth spread across my lap. The dog had peed on me. "Oh, come on!" I shouted, disgusted. Sarah panicked, swerving onto the shoulder near an on-ramp. I jumped out, cradling Otis, her body limp. Terror gripped me. Terror gripped me. "You gave her too much. You need the dog." Frantic, I spotted a puddle and rushed toward it, trying to wake her. Her body flopped lifelessly in my arms. Then, a sound. Not from Otis, not from Sarah. A deep, wheezing breath. Right behind me, I turned, my own breath freezing in my throat. Standing just beyond the reach of our headlights was the man from the road. His glasses glinted. His mouth stretched into an unnatural grin, and he whispered, low, ragged, "You should have stopped when I told you to." I ran. Otis sprang to life, bolting back to the car. Sarah screamed as I threw myself inside, locking the doors. The figure stepped forward. His silhouette flickered, like he wasn't fully there. Then he was gone. We sped into the city, shaken, cold, and certain of one thing: some roads don't want you to leave. That night still haunts me. Who or what was that man? Was he real? A ghost? Something worse? All I know is this: if a sheriff tells you to stop, listen, because some warnings aren't just for your safety, they're for your survival.